All right, so I think we're good. It's 4:30 if you want to start. Rick, again, this is, oh, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and thank you. Leslie, I assume you'll be my hands there in case something goes awry.
Absolutely, I'll be right here.
Excellent. Welcome all. This is a very unique experience talking to my screen and assuming that I see a bunch of head nods and interested viewers for this presentation. I want to thank Leslie so much for inviting me to do this and test this out, even though I couldn't come back to Boston. So the title of this talk is Estimates, Expectations, Evolution. If you saw the session overview, you'll know that this largely talks about project management, but it impacts all aspects of the business, business owner, clients, developers, designers, et cetera. So I'm very hopeful that there's one or more things that you take out of this presentation. I do want to sort of set the stage with a request because my goal here is not for you to take the system in total, but to, again, find what's useful and discard what's not. So I always like to prompt people by really focusing on taking action here. Like, what one or two things from this talk will you be able to directly apply in your business or your organization or your individual practice out of it? And also, what can you share? And then also at the very end, I'll ask for questions. So there's a URL that I'll get back to the bottom. I use the same URL at Nashville because I'm collecting all the different results, and it's been incredibly positive, but I'm getting a lot of good questions. So you'll have a chance for feedback at the end. And if you drop an email, I'll actually respond to you individually. So quick shout outs. Leslie talked about my company, Drud Tech, makers of DDEV. If you're a developer, designer, site builder, and been using a Docker-based tool, you're probably familiar with using solutions that try to abstract away complexity. I'm sure you've seen sessions today where building websites, aggressive, ambitious digital experiences is becoming harder. Everything on the left is the things that we want to do, and everything on the right is the things that we have to do in order to make those things happen. So we help build tools like DDEV Local, and we're in the process of open sourcing a open source hosting solution to help individuals that really want to adopt more DevOps practices and continuous integration into their companies. So that's enough about my company. Let's just get in the meat of this. So how did I get here? I think project management in this space is varied. There are a lot of people with formal certifications in project management and business development, account management. But there's a lot of people that kind of get thrown into this. And I take this more from an engineering mindset. I did graduate from MIT with 2 degrees, which more important than the degree itself really taught me a lot about critical thinking. I then sort of got randomly thrown into the Drupal space. I've been here for about 10 years, really enjoyed the community, what I've been able to achieve. I've worked in everything from the security team, PCI compliance, and here's what's useful for this conversation. I started as a technical project architect when I joined an agency. So I really lived between the clients, between the developers, and between the project management teams. And I learned this sort of system a little bit trial by fire to sort of integrate those components and how to best fit a solution that worked for everybody. And then I moved out of development completely and moved more towards running the business, as well as spinning out 2 startups that came from the agency that I was a part of. So I've seen all aspects of the Drupal business, all the way from a solo developer working remote, all the way to leading a team of 60 individuals, and everything in between. If you're a student of the space and you find anything if you're valuable, I would highly recommend seeking out some of these additional authors, speakers. They're fantastic. Seth Brown at Lullabot has informed a lot of my thinking. His articles and presentations are just top notch. I can't recommend him higher, as well as Todd. And Cindy McCourt also has a fantastic book, still relevant to this day, describing all the methodologies, and there's a lot of nuggets to learn there. And then there's also some things that will expand your thinking on different topics, everything from Goldratt with the theory of constraints, all the way down to Scott Birkin, who was formerly a project manager at Microsoft. So the slide deck will be uploaded, I believe, right, Leslie? I think we have the ability to upload a deck, so you'll be able to find these and sort of follow these trails if you need to. And of course, this isn't my technique. I've sort of assembled a bunch of things from a lot of people and to find a best fit for me and my companies. But your more than willing and in fact encouraged in everything in this space to take this, make it your own, mash it up with other people, with other thoughts, and release it and share it back to the community. So I really look forward to seeing if any of you take any of this material and end up mixing it up and making it your own and getting it out there into the public again. So I have a theory that there's, and by the way, I know this is designed for Drupal, and everyone's seeing this bright yellow screen, and this violates like all accessibility patterns, so I apologize for my abrupt use of color. But I wanted to talk to the pain because, you know, project management and sort of effective project management in terms of the overarching holistic view as a company is not just a nice to have, it's a critical to have. And, you know, there's, you know, a lot of people look at project management and so forth as overhead, but it's such just a critical piece of it. And you can live and die by a few factors. Even if you have the best development team and best designers, best UX, best site builders, best clients, if you can't manage expectations and bring them through to completion, you can really get yourself in a world of hurt, and the company can lose money and people need to be let go. And I wish, you know, when people read articles, they usually read the good moments, the things when things are all going great. But if everyone here is in the room has been in this space long enough, you've probably been in, you know, some pretty stressful situations, and mine was very much so. So I had to learn through adversity. So a lot of these techniques are not just what you use in times of peace, as I like to call it. They're things that you can use in times of war, meaning when things are going bad and falling apart and people are scrambling and running fast. These are the things that you can start introducing to sort of stabilize the ship. And then once you get stability, you can start to use this and become more proactive and a little bit more thoughtful in your processes. So, and again, this estimator, I can't, this literally saved my career, I believe, at one point. And I say that not to be hyperbolic, but there was periods of time where things were to the point where we had to quickly assess RFPs and get gut shots, but doing it in a way that we could evolve it in such a way that we didn't paint ourselves in a corner and cause ourselves harm by making, you know, a misaccurate statement. So, so this process was something I needed just for my own survival, and it became something popular and very successful with my company. I've presented this about 3 times. I did two trial runs at some other camps, and then once at Nashville, and you know, I've had a collection of testimonials of people that have actually applied this already in their business. You know, taken a few things and really get some good results with clients, and really helping surface the difficult conversation. So my promise to you is that this is a very real thing. This is not a theoretical thing that you can talk about in a vacuum, but this is something where I've used to navigate through some of the trickiest conversations with, you know, some, you know, big budgets and a lot of stakeholders. So I definitely don't take this subject lightly. And on the positive side, I know I've been very kind of doom and gloom here, but the reality is, if done right, I've actually used this tool to upsell clients, because once they're a part of it, once they're sitting on your side of the table, and seeing what you see and seeing that this isn't just voodoo, that you're just pulling numbers out of the air and doing wild ass guesses and so forth, that they become a part of it, that they collaborate with you, things become less adversarial, and they actually help reduce scope themselves or help increase scope, but with a better understanding of where the budget comes to meet those. So I've heard clients say they felt more empowered having, you know, before, when we didn't show them this material, then same client, you know, get through the middle of the project, start working with them through these other items, them actually embracing us and also using it when they come back to us before they even come to us. And even better is this becomes something that protects your team, protects the company, and ultimately it also protects your clients, because I think there's a tendency to avoid some of these tough conversations, and the sooner you can get ahead of it with data, with a framework, the more that you can protect their investment, because they're a big part of this too. I have the estimator itself, and I like to just jump into it, and that's my tendency, my bias. But for me, it's better to sort of walk through a couple concepts first, because if you just use the estimator rotely, I don't really think you get as much value out of it, because it becomes a checkbox, it becomes a checklist. It doesn't become something you can really grok and own and evolve it and modify it to your own business. So I'm going to go over a couple of different things to think about and that sort of serve as the foundation for how we got there. And then we'll spend the last part of the talk actually going through the template. I'll bring up my spreadsheet, which is publicly available and shareable and copyable, and kind of walk through a scenario of how you could modify it. This at a glance is kind of the big picture. This is kind of where I ultimately want to bring you all. I don't want you to get too lost in this yet. We'll come back to this diagram. But somewhere between all the way on the left and all the way on the right is where all the mess happens. And our goal is to, using that kind of concept of user-centered design, or if you want to call it discovery through deployment, whatever your terminology is, be able to break things down into different levels of abstraction, different lenses, and be able to refine each of those channels as you go down, so you ultimately connect them all at the end for a successful project. So I just wanted to give this as sort of a visual anchor point of like the tour I'm going to bring you through. So I hate the word estimates because I know as a developer, as a project manager, as someone leading the business, et cetera, that if someone just basically asks you, like, what's the estimate? Just I don't want to hear all this talk. I don't want to talk this through. Just give me a number and tell me what that is. It's very unfortunate to be pushed into a black and white statement, because then that becomes an anchor that they hang on to. And if you push that too high as your first guess, or too low, that already starts to anchor the conversation and can sometimes lose a client before you get started, or sometimes set unrealistic expectations before you begin as well. And for me, the really powerful turnaround was just knowing that these things actually do evolve. They should evolve. They need to evolve. But setting that expectation up front and actually showing clients as you're going through the process how those ones are evolving and working with them makes that more real to them, as opposed to more arbitrary. So I always make sure that I remind everyone who asks me for an estimate that an estimate is a guess. And it's always based on the current information at the current moment of time. And current is important because these are functions of time. They change with time. And then people's expectation is, an expectation based on past perceptions. But the evolution, which is the thing that's missing, is how those perceptions and the expected level of effort will change with time based on new information, new conversations, the context changing, other projects evolving, your client's business changing underneath you, or your business changing underneath you, and how all that is affected by those factors. I'm actually the worst person to probably talk about user-centered design, probably in this audience, because this is a conference for those that are more versed in this space. But really, it breaks down to how you walk through a project in kind of more of a waterfall-ish approach, where you're going through a full discovery to ascertain information, you're getting some initial designs in there, you're defining all the user stories, back-end models, et cetera, going to a development and getting through a deployment. And that's really a framework. So if you hear me saying UCD, it's really just a breakdown of those 5 Ds, the 5 steps. You will have your own flavor. We didn't follow ours to the T, but it's just what we went off of. And so these are my tools. These are the things that when I had to make tough decisions or how to work through something, these are the things I've learned through other places. But it's sort of a consolidation of all these things that really set me up for success. And the first is called lenses. And this one is, I've seen a lot of newer individuals, or even very seasoned individuals, get stuck on this concept, which is, when you look at an RFP, we see things through one lens. We see things through just a stack of papers. And that stack of papers represents a living, breathing thing, a website, right? A website that has interaction, a website that has design, a website that has data, a website that has APIs, a website that has all these different subcomponents that no amount of paper in text, in sentences will ever describe. Just like a person has so many different ways that you can look at, evaluate, and you can look at all these different subsystems. So when we think of the human body, my wife's actually going through a nutrition class right now. So there's you, the person. There's you, there's me, Rick, and I'm 37, and I'm all these things, these labels, right? But there's all these subcomponents that we miss if we just look at the website through a singular lens. So this goes back to that diagram I sent before, which is client comes and they're very excited by a set of comps that their designer made or that they outsourced to, and they come back. But you now need to go through the reality of unearthing all the different components that build that. Everything from how the layout happens and how that layout changes with different device sizes and device types, and what the page structures are like, and what are the APIs, and what's the database, and what's the content types. And then what are the features? What's the functionality? What's the glue? And that's why lenses are important. And if you get to, for a really big project, if you're dealing with a project, on the $1 million plus size level, with lots of stakeholders, you really need to strongly consider what lenses are going to best convey to the client what it is that your ideas are. What are the best representations of how this is ultimately going to piece together in a holistic way? So everything from wireframes to brand strategy, audits, timelines, budgets, stories, features. These are all different ways that you're going to slice your project up as you're describing it, providing assets that the client and you can use as a conversation piece, but ultimately serve as the plan to build. And I've seen too many people fall in the pit trap of staying just with style tiles and comps and wireframes, or if your team is very developer heavy, focusing on build specs and user stories. But if you don't kind of attack it from enough different angles, you can really get yourself in a world of hurt. And here's the other thing is it's not just the makeup of your team that'll affect which lenses you tend to bias towards. It's also that of your clients. If your clients are very engineering heavy, you're going to focus more on features and build specs and data models and so forth and APIs. If your clients are very visual, you're going to get in the other end of the spectrum. And it's really important, regardless of where they feel safe, because some will feel safer. A build spec may be big and scary, but there's a design or a wireframe is very approachable. I think it's very much a responsibility of us to sort of look at them on all these subsystems so that way we can integrate them back to the whole. Here's another concept that I feel is important, because again, we're all trying to get perfection out of the gate, but the reality is there's a great quote by Vesa that I posted on the session talk, which is, Drupal, features are cheap, but details are expensive. And nothing highlights that massive gap more than Commerce Kickstart, in my opinion. It's one of my favorite distributions. You can go to Simply Test Me, you can kick it off, and all of a sudden you'll have a fully functional e-commerce experience built in a minute, and you get all this feature and all this functionality out of the box, and it's impressive and it's amazing, and that's just fantastic. Now you take that Commerce Kickstart distribution and you need to get third-party integrations, and you need to work with ERPs and migration paths and uptime and all the stuff, and now that one simple 1 minute deliverable is now 100 to 10,000 hours, depending on size and scope of the project. So we want to look at things quickly. We want to assess them very rapidly in the beginning and try to get as best clarity on the order of magnitude as we can. But the trick is that we have our own visual biases, our own historical biases, and we need training to start developing eyes and senses to be able to see something at a very low granularity, but be able to pick out detail, whether detail is more complex than we think or less complex than we think. So I like to walk people through an experiment, and if you know what this is at first, please don't shout it out, because some people will get this immediately, and some people will get this only after we go through to the last level of resolution. Which is, if we look at something like this, if a client came to you and they start talking very quickly and they start showing you assets and you just see something very blurry, right? You might look at something like this and see something that has a lot of detail, a lot of texture, a lot of, is this a carpet? Is this a rug? Is this what is this? Or is there a lot of pattern? We see a lot of repetition here. So there might be hidden complexity that you can see or that you can't see. And as we tune up the resolution, as we look closer at a specific feature, or we ask questions, we ask probing questions, we start mocking stuff on whiteboards, we get more clarity. We start to see something that seemed pretty blurry, now all of a sudden get a lot more granularity, and we can see actually there's a lot of things going on here. There's a lot of detail. And of course, once we have full clarity, full fidelity, we could see something that's massively complex, that has lots of different logic, that requires things beyond what we see. We see all these dials, but we know that there's going to be more logic in terms of the electronics that power them, in terms of what each dial does and what feature they switch on to. So when evaluating an RFP, you have to be able to see things and start get instincts about where complexity might be as you get more and more granularity. Now, there's another example here, which is we could start with just two seemingly balls of light. And once we get a little bit more resolution here, we kind of get a different perspective here. This could be stars, it could be flashlights, it could be light bulbs, it could be a lot of things. But once we get to one level closer, we get to see something that looks very much like planets. And then when we get full clarity, as we saw with the recent, a few years ago with the recent photos from Pluto, an exact identification of what is being sought after. But then there's things that happen in reverse. Sometimes when we have low fidelity, we might see complexity where it doesn't exist. This is where conspiracy theorists thought there was some massive station on Mars. But when we actually were able to get a higher resolution, we realized there was actually less detail behind that. There was actually less, there wasn't a base there. There wasn't anything there hidden. There was just more, something, again, a little less evolved and therefore a little less detailed. So this is the next concept, which is the 10x to 10,000x of customization. One of the things that I learned very early on was just how painful small modifications to a feature, a default feature, would be, because we could trick our brains into thinking, oh, that small little change that the client asks or the business unit asks or my developer asks for, that looks very benign, and there's no way that will result in a 10% increase in time or a 20% increase in time. That's only a small change. But the reality is, and I wrote a full article about this, that every requirement in an RFP can be met with a low, medium, or high level of effort. If someone asks for something like e-commerce site, the level of changes that could be is just absolutely massive. And the challenge is when you're evaluating an RFP and you have anywhere from 10 to maybe 50 or even 100 features, you can be perfect on 99% of those features, but if you miss one key detail, that can absolutely destroy a budget. And you can just prove that to yourself mathematically, which is if there was 10 features on an RFP and you nailed the exact hours of 10, 10 for or 9 for 9, but that one feature you 10x'd, that by itself can double the budget. And so I like to use the G.I. Joe feature, which is like if a client was to ask you for a G.I. Joe figure, they're on the very simplest level. You can go to Amazon right now, buy one for $20, get it 2 days shipped, and you're done. But if all of a sudden they start adding little wrinkles to that, which is, well, I wanted the G.I. Joe one, but I wanted it with this outfit, or well, I wanted it with not that outfit, but I wanted some custom one. I want you to go to a designer. I want you to go to someone to actually fabricate a custom outfit for that doll. Oh, now that G.I. Joe is not the right size or shape, and I want to get them custom built. And so now you're looking at 3D printing and so forth. And now that one feature you're starting to sweat because you went from like, oh, I can get this done in 5 minutes to holy shit, I'm already at 100 hours. And then, oh, by the way, I want it pixel perfect. I want this exact to mock. And now you're dealing with manufacturing. And oh, by the way, you want end users to be able to generate their own G.I. Joes on the fly, print them, have them delivered in 2 days. And the feature is blown up out of complete proportions. And that seems like a silly example, and I use it because I like to use a non-web example so to sort of take us away from our comfort zone. But the reality is e-commerce has that same level, which is you can deliver base e-commerce functionality out of the box with a PayPal button. But as you add things like Shopify to custom Drupal Commerce Kickstart to full custom Drupal, whenever I had a custom Drupal project, I knew I was a minimum of 100 hours. I could never go below that. Because the custom theme with getting all the modules correct and tested and vetted, you start integrating that Drupal commerce site with ERPs, with warehouses, with APIs, with everything else. You can easily ratchet up another order of magnitude, and again, you can go as complex as you want. So this is how a single line item with a single word or a single sentence or several sentences can span up or down. And our goal here through this estimator is to, as quickly as we can, find out which order of magnitude are we on? So we got to ask probing questions that tell us, are we at the PayPal level? Is this like, they're selling one hat a month and, for $20 and they don't really have a big budget and they just need to get something where someone can put an order in? Or, where are their dragons? What do they integrate in? Do they have existing orders, for X years and membership and recurring billing and all this stuff? We need to quickly assess those types of things. And I already talked before how we can, if we're not careful, and we just take one of those features at face value or play to our sweet spot. If we're used to custom Drupal, but really the client wants something more of a Shopify, or that we're comfortable with custom Drupal, and they're actually pretty damn happy, and they can get most of their features and functionality with just a stock commerce kickstart. We may over or underestimate, significantly based on what order of magnitude that we're sitting on. And I already went through the example of, if you're not careful and you miss an order of magnitude, and this does happen. This is not a theoretical. I've seen one feature go 500 hours over when it was budgeted for about 50 on a $250,000 project because the order of magnitude was completely missed because of some integrations in the back end that were missed during the RFP process. So it can be a very painful lesson to learn. But there's smell tests. For those that are evaluating RFPs, or if you're a designer or developer and you're getting feature requests thrown at you, there are some things that you start to see as your identification marks for when you're going into custom. And again, custom's not bad, but custom is expensive because it takes you out of the box functionality. So anytime you're talking like an integration with an API or an API, once you see extensive requirements, if someone says this one feature like e-commerce and they give you 4 pages of text and all these scenarios, you already know that there's a lot of complexity that has to be nailed down. Migrations from existing data, if you're building a website from a clean slate, meaning no orders, no customers, no anything, you significantly reduce the number of things that you need to consider. But migrations are always a good smell test because sometimes the data doesn't fit to the new model, so you have to do conversions, filtering, et cetera, et cetera. Product types, worked with a furniture store that had, I can't even remember the number of SKUs. It was like 10,000 SKUs with some furniture would have 20 different meta fields of variations, everything from texture to color to weight and all that data. Those can spiral out of control. If you're now trying to power a mobile app, again, not a problem, but definitely adds more complexity. And compliance. If you start seeing things like PCI compliance, e-commerce compliance, HIPAA compliance, you know that there's going to be some extra care per feature. And then eventually just have to know your biases. Like you get to learn what your developers are. If on your team, some will tend to overstate, some will tend to understate, some will try to chase shiny and get some gold plating in. Some people will try to really be conservative and really try to pad so that they know they can hit it out of the park. And also know that if you are relying on vendors, right, they also may be overconfident or unaware of those trip points that sort of move you from one level of magnitude to the next. And of course, there's the classical project and triangle that feature, budget, and timeline are all tightly intermingled. And if any one of those other two change, that there has to be a discussion with the client in terms of how the other changes. So we can always rely on that tried and true method. This was another lesson to me that so there's much ado in this space about Waterfall, Agile, Kanban. Like, what's the perfect project management style? I've yet to find it, and everyone creates their own version of Waterfall or Agile or create it, name it, and just go for it. But this one by Todd at Four Kitchens, to me, was sort of the light bulb moment. Because, and as I'll show in your estimator, Waterfall is an attempt to avoid risk by over-planning, where Agile is an attempt to avoid waste by building as fast as you possibly can. But the challenge is that clients that have a fixed budget in mind, or they generally can't see the whole picture if you go pure Agile, and they can wind up in a Frankenstein, whereas Waterfall, you can end up spending the entire budget talking without developing anything. And what I felt that matches this process of evolution and sort of right-sizing expectations and risk is to use a waterfall approach in the discovery phase and sometimes bleed lightly over in the design phase. But then when you get to definition, development, and deployment, really kick more into an Agile. So make sure that you have enough budget, have enough I guess, rapport with the client to know that, hey, when you go in Agile, you don't have everything defined up front. Things will kind of come up. Budgets may expand or contract a bit. But if you've done your homework and you've done your due diligence in the waterfall approach and made sure you're on the proper levels of magnitude, you've significantly de-risked the situation. So, and then finally, when you get into support, meaning the project's already launched or the phase 1 launch, and you go more to support and maintenance, that's when a Kanban approach is really helpful, when you can start to size things as single tasks across multiple clients. So bringing it all together. So I've given a lot of concepts pretty quickly, but if we think of each website project as lenses, we need to have, websites are complex and multifaceted. We need to look at them from a bunch of angles. That each angle we need to progressively enhance upon, meaning we start off with the low fidelity wireframes, we work to full-blown comps, we start with low fidelity content type evaluation, we end up with a build spec. We start off with high level features, we end up with user stories and acceptance criteria. So we're trying to smartly step through and not add so much detail up front that we have to spend a lot of effort up front when we're still just trying to feel things out and trying to get through those first few phases. But as we go to the project, we need to enhance those. We need to be very aware of the cost of custom and when to use it because it makes sense and when to avoid it because it's going to be overly expensive without much ROI. We need to understand how constraints of features, timeline, and budget are interdependent. And ideally, we take a process that fits that, a little bit of planning up front, not so much planning that we waste all the whole budget and then we don't have enough time for development, but not so little planning that we just kind of run off in all directions and we can't keep the ship steered properly. So this is kind of where I, racked my brains for a few years of like, how do I was trying to always apply the Agile Waterfall, the one size fits all. And for me, what this all boiled down to, and this is kind of like the crux of the solution, which was, how do I have a Google spreadsheet with a revision history where I can create in 30 minutes when an RFP hits my plate, but use that one sheet through the entire project from inception to launch? And that sounds maybe crazy, but it's doable. And again, so it's like when we get that RFP, and again, not every RFP needs a 30-minute response, but if you're getting several a day or several a week, and you need to be able to at least assess, are you on the right wavelength for your size of team, for your ideal project size, ideal complexity, ideal market, vertical, et cetera. And then once you get through that process, this evolving estimator starts and comes with you. You can get a quick gut check at the RFP level, but at each stage along the way, you're refining it as we'll go through next. So in pre-sales, basically I generated this document such that it was a series of questions. So I had a certain number of features. I knew kind of how many discovery meetings I might have. I had some heuristics about, well, based on number of discovery meetings, I had a certain multiple of how much development time that might be. And my whole goal at this stage is just get labels of features, just try to identify as many things as I possibly could, categorize those features, get wild ass guesses out on the plate, just so I know, like, hey, if I have 20 features and each is going to take me 10 hours, just at a gut level, I know I'm at a $200 project times my hourly rate, for the company. This is kind of a guess budget. And if I'm already at that point over the client's budget threshold, I already have a sense that this is not a proper fit for us, and vice versa. And then in discovery, and by the way, I'm going to bring people through the actual estimator, so I'm just going to quickly go through this, and then we'll walk through it, actually viewing the spreadsheet itself. So, like, let's say you land the deal. So you spend, you don't want to spend hundreds of hours up front to win a 10K deal or 100K deal, because the amount of time spent just to land the project will essentially lower your overall margin, and but you don't want to spend so little time that you land a project and only find that your expectations are so out of whack, and you get a very upset client. You have to fight over budget, time, and all that. So that's where you get into a discovery period where it's like, okay, given those initial features, how do we start to summarize them more so that way we have layman terms summaries, initial assumptions. Again, this is what you're going to use to find those customs, those order of magnitude changes. And you're going to start getting out some initial, very high level, very rough acceptance criteria. And this was the magic thing for me, which was starting to do a red, yellow, green highlighting of this, which is green becomes everything mandatory and highest ROI. So you, the vendor, the individual, the developer, the project manager, whoever, work with the client to say, look, based on your needs and based on what's going to meet your goals, we think that everything in green is going to give you the highest ROI because it's either the lowest cost, highest value, and it fits within 80% of your stated budget. And then we start to tag other things as yellow, which is high value, but if things go wrong and these things in green expand and or scope increases and so forth, these are at risk. These are things that we think are high value, but based on the current budget, we can't guarantee that. We can get to them most likely or usually, but not always. And so you're already putting a seed up front, which is like, in order to sort of guarantee these, we need to either get more budget or we need to help prioritize with you. And then things that you redline are things like, in our professional opinion, you may think this is important to get this very complex integration, but based on your stated objectives, this is going to be high cost, low value, and definitely outside your budget. And here's another cool trick that I learned, which is something that might like if there's, again, a high, medium, low way of developing a certain feature, like, hey, here's how you can use Shopify to just get your storefront. We can spend the rest of your budget building your Drupal experience. And we can do that for X hours. If you want full-blown custom e-commerce integrated with your Drupal site, it's going to take 10x that or 100x that. You could split that out into two different features and help them pick and choose and say which one is the right size for you. And that way, you're not saying no, but you're just trying to sort of highlight that major discrepancy that they may not fully understand going into it. And again, it helps collaborate and get those sized up and down. Design phase is a little bit benign. Not that, because design will absolutely introduce new features, new functionality, new logic. But really at this point, you're trying to sanity check if when you get to the design, when you're looking at the wires, sitemap, the flows, that you're not catching things that weren't already addressed. You're going to find new things here, and that's going to affect them, but you're really just clarifying the estimate based on that. And then again, like if you got through that and you got thumbs up on both sides, you got your high-level features, your initial description acceptance criteria, your designs, you're starting to see this holistically work together. That's when you start deep diving. That's when you start saying, okay, let's get these things buttoned up and ready for development, getting developers in the conversation, ensuring self-consistency, making sure that one feature's acceptance criteria don't cross and break the other ones. And that's when you start locking in actual time and dollars from the previous phases. And that's when you can start to say, okay, we started off thinking this was a $60,000 project. It got up to about an $80,000 project, but then we worked with you, get it down to about a 50. And now let's refine the acceptance criteria to meet that objection or the objective to get to that 50K level. And then in development, you update those. So if you use systems like Jira or time trackers like Harvest or Toggle or whatever, you can actually link to that feature on that spreadsheet off to your time tracker. So you and or your client, if you feel empowered enough to do so, can actually check it and validate, like, where were we on or off course, what changed it, and you can actually show real world results. It takes a lot of confidence to be able to do this. I wouldn't recommend doing this the first time. We had a client pressure us to do this. It actually worked out incredibly well. It actually protected us more because they got to see, as things were changing, how scope creep actually affected the budget. And they, again, took more ownership and more collaboration. They didn't like it, but they actually got to see kind of where they contributed. But they also saw where we missed. And so we had to be a little bit more humble and a little bit more realistic with some of the estimates when we were missing. And then finally deploy and then do a postmortem. So let's just kind of step through real fast what this looks like. So I think my screen is still sharing. Oh, look, there's some user already still getting this, which is great. So this is a publicly shared Google spreadsheet. So what I would do if this was me and some RFP landed on my doorstep, I would just get this out. I mean, I have a starting point of 500 hours because that was sort of our sweet spot project size, which based on hourly rate would represent a cost. And the current budget is down here, which is I would start to fill out these questions. So again, which hourly rate? And by the way, on the public one of these, I actually provide some additional instructions to sort of help provide guidance as to like what these questions mean and how to answer them appropriately. If you're seeing in the RFP, like a lot of different topics, everything from e-commerce and HIPAA compliance, coupons, accessibility, SEO, the whole 9 yards, you have to figure out how many meetings that would you need in order to feel comfortable that you got to that 80 to 90% accuracy level. How many people you want to bring in discovery meetings? How many hours do you think each meeting is going to cost? How much, how complex do you just get a gut feeling of the site? Low, medium, hard. How much time people want to spend on branding, et cetera, number of landing pages, number of content types, amount of time that you spend on QA and PM. These questions I love because this really could be an eye opener for clients because when they have a budget of 100 hours maybe of your time, there's this sort of wish, this hope that all 100 hours are going to be in development design, that like literally every hour is going to be spent on an effective delivery of value. When in reality, integration QA, making sure all those features come together, just managing the meetings, the scheduling, the coordination, and all those things, running sprints and so forth, they take time. And by sort of surfing this up front as like, look, this will add 15 to 20% overhead, because we're a team size of 5 up front, just gives them more clarity and more expectation of this. And this is a good idea too. If there's a lot of uncertainty, like they're asking for features that you don't necessarily have worked for in the past, but they trust you that you need to spend some time researching domain access or or organic groups or multilingual or whatever, you can bake that into the estimate as time that you're going to need based on overall feature size to just do research into those features. And again, you bake that into a per estimate. So, and I also added like notes and descriptions in here so you can see kind of like, what these mean by labels, by categories, by phases. And it's beautiful. You can go through and just start stubbing out category 1, feature 2, feature 3, feature 4, gut shot estimates, high and low, 2 hours. Okay, recurring billing. Are we using just Stripe out of the box? Okay, 2 hours. Are we doing something more complicated? Okay, 20. Here's a 1-sentence summary. I don't think this is highly valuable, so I put it as phase 2. I put this one, a rating system was critical as part of their RFP, so I put it in phase 1. E-commerce was phase 1. And now I can actually have high, medium, low estimates. So it's like here, just on the current granularity, I have a very wide delta, which averages to this, which averages to a budget of that. And if they come into me saying that they only have a budget of 50K, I know that I have to, in real time, as I'm updating those phases and updating those features, I can be changing them and saying, okay, what is the current budget? Okay, can I drop that budget to 40,000 or drop it to 45? And I can be, very rapidly updating these numbers to reflect where I have to cut or where I have to expand in order to meet their needs, but also balance budget and timeline. And again, so you start off in columns A through E, and maybe even a little bit of F, if you want to get some detail in there. But then as you go more into the design and definition phases, that's when you introduce column G, which you then use to refine. And so at all times, you update those acceptance criteria. You go back to these numbers, which you update them, which updates this, which updates the budget. And again, you're working with them collaboratively. Your team has access to this document, and there's since Google Docs has revision history, you can roll it back. You can say, look, when we did the RFP, here was where I was estimated. Here's why I estimated it. When we got into the discovery after the 3 meetings, we updated it to be this. We got in the design phase. We identified some new line items. We put them in there. We recognized some things were in scope, so we green-lighted them. We worked with you to make that work. So we had to take something in green into yellow, and we ended up with that number. And the whole history of that conversation becomes a single source of truth updated along the way. And for those that are brave enough, you could actually then put another column here, which is actual, and you could start to track against your Jira tickets, your GitHub tickets, or your Toggle tickets, anything where you do time tracking and update it. And then you could compare sort of what the current target is of estimate based on high, medium, low, as well as what's actually been spent and what budget's been used. So you literally can evolve this whole thing through the entire project. And we've had several clients. One client loved this so much that we did this for their next 5 projects. We actually worked with them through the budget process to figure out what it would take. And then all the way to the point where we deployed the site in ongoing maintenance, we actually used this and just kept adding new items as they added them. And then we actually had to think almost 20 columns. Like we did a 2-week sprint, so we tracked on a per week basis. Now that was the most hardcore one, but you could just end with getting to a budget that you submit in order to land the deal. But as you go through your internal processes, you could still be evaluating this as a way to ensure that you're still on RF course. And if you have to have any difficult conversations, that you get ahead of that. So that's basically it, but there's some really cool things that you learn about your organization as you do this, which is, I don't know why this is like a magic number for me, but I found that if I target the discovery process to be about 50% of the budget, that was the sweet spot. If we spent too much of the budget, like 30% talking and planning, we overplanned. And you're still not going to avoid certain things that come up, and you write out a development budget because you spent too much time planning. But if my discovery meetings and sort of those interviews with the client were less than that, that's where we got in trouble. PM time is typically 20% of the middle third of the budget, meaning when you're in the design, definition, and development phases of the all the way from discovery through deployment. That's just the price you pay. And now you can get around that if you have a single developer or a dedicated team attached to a client. But even running the sprint planning meetings, internal conversations, et cetera, where developers are not developing, designers are not designing, that is just 20% of the budget, and there's just no way around that. And also, if you're doing QA along the way and you have each feature fully vetted before you commit it. You did your due diligence, you had multiple people review, you had the client review, et cetera. I find that integration QA at the end of the project, making sure all features kind of reconnect and things don't break, typically was 50% of the budget. If you're very disciplined, that might be down to 5 or 10. If you're not and moving very rapidly, that may be 20. And that could be a hard pill to swallow for a client to see that as a line item. But if you're truthful to yourself and them, that's just a reality. And it allows you to still be very aggressive on the per line item features, but it allows you to sort of still provide buffer for the inevitable things changing or breaking that have to be reconnected as you get to the end of a project. And this last one is the biggie, which is actual time developing, building the actual CSS, site building, coding, everything else represents about 40% of the total budget for a typical agency size. So that's a good heuristic to think and rule of thumb to keep in mind when you think, oh, I could do this in 10K. Well, is that 10K development time? If so, you have to be thinking of a multiple of that when you add in all the overhead of your team, of your organization. I'm humble enough to know that this is not a perfect plan. It worked pretty well with my teams and the people I trained to use this, but I'm no longer in the agency space. I'm more in the product space. This was kind of my final kind of, I guess, gift, or kind of hope that is a gift to the community as a way to give back and help others that, take the learnings and all the hard stuff that I went through and help try to give back in a way that is productive and helpful for other people. I still would love the idea of doing a more in-depth training to sort of go through an actual nuts and bolts. Here's some example RFPs. Let's walk through it. And here's how you would go through this with your team. So if you're interested, please reach out to me. The feedback for this presentation can be, again, using the same one I did in Nashville here. And if anyone who emails me directly, I'll send a copy of the article, templates, everything else that's finished to sort of help round this out for you. I still haven't got to the point where I've written a companion article, because when I started to shell this out, I really feel like this is a Udemy course, like something that would take a full day or two training workshop to really get into the nuts and bolts of the tactical blow by blow for this. But my hope is that this presentation so far is really kind of either giving you a few more insights or a few things to think about or things to look at differently, and that there are aspects that you can implement in your own day-to-day. I think I'm just about out of time. I know this has probably been a long day for most of you, so I want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen, to show up here, and I'm happy to take any sort of feedback, questions that I can do through a remote audio connection.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Does anybody in here have any questions you want to come up and ask? You'd have to come up here to the front, or you can just, email them to him like Rick said earlier. Does anybody have any immediate questions they want to come up and ask? Or is everybody good? All right, well, that was a great presentation, Rick. Thank you so much for spending the time with us from Denver.
No, thank you for the opportunity. I really, really appreciated this. And again, I know this was a lot and I try to cover so much, but this is a big passion of mine, because it made the difference of saving the company and growing the team and doing a lot of great things and having more time to do the really important stuff as opposed to firefighting. So if you have any experiences that are like that and you want to reach out for any questions, I'm happy to provide some guidance.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.